in the British territories. And fourth, we had the Portuguese. And those of us who understand the Portuguese colonial history is that they came to this rather late, and so they were actually in a hurry to produce property, to produce goods. And production was the main focus for the Portuguese. There are 5 territories, I think, in Africa. You'll find them in Mozambique, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde. Here we have another tradition. Did I leave you behind? Yes, I didn't move the slides. Here we have what we call the indigenous or homebred tradition of cooperatives. Here, the people there copied from different practices across the borders, copying from the British, copying from the French, and coming out with some kind of models of cooperatives that are not actually cannot identify them with any of those colonial powers. And we call this the indigenous cooperative model. It's based on a blending of various practices in other colonial territories. And that's why you'll find that in Ethiopia, there is both, there is hierarchical, but there is also horizontal, and even the accepting one person as the administrator of cooperatives has been negotiated over time until very recently that we have this. And so, these 5 traditions inform the configuration of cooperatives that we have around the continent from all parts of traditions as outlined that way. I have rushed through this so that I save on time. But this is what informs the difference in cooperatives in Uganda, for example, and Mozambique, and Angola, and even in West Africa here, the type of cooperatives in Ghana may not be the same as in Senegal and so on. But the bottom line is that during this period, most of these cooperatives were basically agricultural. The distribution was in agriculture for obvious reasons, that agriculture was the main focus, the main activity, and we'll see that during this phase 1, we don't have other types of cooperatives that we shall be seeing in a little while, because agriculture was the main, and they were basically marketing cooperatives, marketing in cash crops like coffee, cotton, cocoa, maybe dairy, and so on, that the colonial state was interested in, not in. And what we find here is that at independence, the new state basically inherited the cooperatives that they found, with all their colonial attributes, with all their colonial traditions. And the state, the new state, the independent state, found cooperatives to be instruments for accelerating socioeconomic development. And they wanted these cooperatives to serve as instruments for mobilizing local resources, including people. People who are believed to be diverse in class, in socio-economic status, even in ethnic identities. And they thought that cooperatives could help to bring all these people together for nation building, or building the new nation. And so cooperatives became part of the populist nationalist strategy for the new government. And they were unfortunately using them the way they were. And from the first phase that I mentioned, we don't see really consensual participation of Africans in forming the cooperatives, other than knowing that through cooperatives is the only way to start participating in some of the things that the colonial powers were doing. Some were simply copying the colonial powers, but without the basic understanding of what it was and what its principles were and what its values were. But this is how the independent governments took them. And what happened is that the new governments created structures for quick development of cooperatives. Some of the structures included legislation, new legislations, especially in the Anglophone countries. You will find the Cooperative Societies Act being enacted quickly, establishing departments for developing or promoting cooperatives, and state participation in cooperative affairs, like in monitoring and even managing election of management committees, and so on. The state controlled cooperatives' economic activities, and so forth. And the cooperative movement subsequently did not go back to its actual identity. The identities that we defined, like voluntary, okay, like democratic participation. I know the registrar is there, but these are things that they never reflected on at independence. We saw politics, where I come from. We saw politics filtrating into the election of cooperative leaders. And eventually cooperative leaders started speaking the language of the state rather than the members. And so cooperatives were being used for other political ends other than the members' interests and members' participation. And so the movement lacked independence and even the democratic character that we normally talk about. Similarly, or continuously, out of that, what I may call capturing the cooperative movement, we saw a symbiotic partnership between cooperatives on one hand and the state on the other. Symbiotic because cooperatives were also given privileged positions in the marketing of produce. For instance, cooperatives became the only agents of marketing boards. And in the British territories, every crop had a marketing board. In Kenya, we had the coffee board, we had the cotton board. Up to now, we have the dairy board that was the only organ for selling those crops. And the cooperative became the only agent that could deliver produce to those boards. And that's how cooperatives were benefiting out of that relationship. But in the meantime, in the meantime, they were not operating as independent as they should be. They are gaining that prominent position, but not independent. And therefore, with time, we saw farmers joining cooperatives, not because they want to be members, but they must sell cocoa. They must sell cotton. They must sell milk, and so on. And that somehow, that relationship, what I'm calling the symbiotic relationship between the cooperatives and the state, actually resulted into growth in numbers of cooperatives relative to the colonial period. We had more because people had no alternative to participate in some of the agricultural produce. And also this time, I should also point out that some two types of cooperatives emerged on the continent. The financial cooperatives that did not exist in the colonial period, because the new state now required some finances to run these new entities that they were using for that kind of development. And so we saw the rise of financial cooperatives, particularly banks. I don't know whether there was a cooperative bank in Ghana. There must have been one, then it collapsed all of a sudden, okay? And that was the pattern in most African countries, with the exception of Kenya, whose bank survived up to today. But the rest, Tanzania was just revived the other day, I think last year or so. So banks emerged during this period. We had savings and credit cooperatives that are now very popular and very common, emerged during this period. In a few countries, there are also insurance cooperatives. In Kenya, we have one, which has continued, but not in many countries. We also saw the emergence of housing cooperatives that never happened never existed during the colonial period, also emerging during this period. But also, as much as much as these developments were happening during the independent states period, there were also challenges, there were also problems. Like I pointed out about politics, lack of members' participation, persistent low business efficiency, because in some places cooperatives were thought to be government sections, government departments, and therefore they are not doing business the normal way, the way that one wants to make profit. One is planning to succeed, and so there was some inefficiency, low capital base. Many cooperatives could not pay farmers for their produce on time because they didn't have the money to pay. They were indebted because of that. Poor entrepreneurial capability of managers and board members, widespread mismanagement, irregularities, and so on. And so we can say that during this period, cooperatives might have sold members' produce. They might have enabled people to participate in economic activities. But the broader expectations of the state was never realized. The broader expectation of self-reliance, agricultural innovations, increased productivity, socioeconomic equalization, structural change did not happen during this phase. And that this became the burden for the next phase that conditioned developments. And the third phase was the liberalization of the economy from 1990s. And we know what liberalization did. It simply removed the state from the saddle in the economy and replaced it with private individuals in the market. And what that meant is that cooperatives no longer enjoyed the protection that the state used to provide. And many things would happen during this era. Some of the services were withdrawn, like auditing, supervision, management training. A few colleges actually almost wound up. A few cooperative colleges almost wound up because of the state's withdrawal. I think with the exception of Kenya again and Moshi in Tanzania. The Ugandan one, I think it collapsed and so on. Okay. Training, because of the withdrawal of government support to those colleges. There was a reduction in cooperative departments for supervising and monitoring those cooperatives. And the monopolistic status of marketing cooperatives also went. And so cooperatives had to compete with other businesses on the market to sell. And also members of cooperatives had the option of selling their produce to anybody on the market, not necessarily the marketing board that the state had controlled over the years. These conditions, this changing environment, which some people will be talking about in this, the immediate challenge was the collapse of many cooperatives. In the early 1990s, we saw many of them dip. And that environment and the collapse of cooperatives triggered corrective measures from both the government and the cooperatives themselves. The government, of course, reviewed the law to bring back some regulation. And I will be asking towards the end, how much regulation is appropriate for cooperative development? It seems like when you withdraw regulation, then they don't survive. But if you over-regulate, again, it's also bad. How much regulation do we require to ensure that cooperatives continue growing and developing? And so the state brought back some control, some by reviewing the laws and so on. And the outcome of some of these regulatory environments, and I didn't mention intervention by the cooperatives themselves. The cooperatives themselves also reacted to this by most of them resorting back to their identity. From the mid-1990s going on, to promote their own business interests. I should also mention that some of them had the freedom to seek for financial support. Like in Kenya, we had, which I have displayed there, the data. And in those 11 countries, if you look at them, the numbers were actually growing. Of course, some were not growing, but we had a presence of cooperatives in the general population rising to 9%, which literally we can translate that about 9% of the population belonged at least to a cooperative. And here we are also showing some of the total population of those countries. And that brings us to the present, where we are from 2005. And in phase 5, unfortunately, I cautioned about this. We don't have data. We have been in a black box. And recently we did a study that we are calling the COPSTAR study, which covered 20 countries in Africa. We collected information from these countries, and I've tried to show there the countries that were covered in this COPSTAR study early this year. We are preparing this data for publication, and I wouldn't want this to be cited before the publication. And so we did studies covering Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana. Here we had a representation, Senegal, Cape Verde. We also had Morocco, Algeria, Zambia, DRC, Cameroon, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Tanzania, and Togo, as well as Mozambique, as one of the Lusophone countries to ensure representation. And the data that we have, which is will be published, shows that there is growth of the cooperative movement since liberalization. The movement is no longer directed from above, is no longer controlled from above. In the previous period, we used to see a lot of influence from donors and the government. We are now seeing an independent movement coming out stronger. Law, I think it will fast track the legal review, policy review of cooperatives in a number of countries. But some of these reviews are being initiated by cooperatives. It is COPs that are pushing for this rather than the government bringing it down. This is happening in most of the countries. There is continuous restructuring of cooperative unions and federations for vertical and also horizontal this time around. It is being considered. There is also efforts at horizontal integration of cooperatives. We are seeing federations embarking on self-regulation so that should the state regulation fail, then they are able to hold the movement on their own. We are also seeing a fairly maturing cooperative movement. Maturing because it is now determining its agenda rather than being determined by others as it used to be in the past. And there is emergence of clear quantitative and qualitative changes in the cooperative movement, which these ones I just ran through quickly. These are some of the indications of the quantitative changes in the number of cooperatives. You can see we just have about, these are 12 or 11 countries which had data, comparative data, for 2005 and 2023. And we are seeing a rise from 151,000 cooperatives in those countries only. Please don't misquote me. 151,000 to 433,000. I don't know how many times that would be in the number of additions, new additions that we have, in just 3 times, more or less. As much as you will see in some countries there is a decline, but on the general it's on the rise. Of course, this is what I've been saying, most of this. Other countries that were not in the table are also presenting quite a large number of cooperatives. Tanzania, 10,000. Is it 10,000? Yes. But Tanzania, I should say, and my colleague is here, this is after auditing the cooperative register to come out with the verifiable number. Otherwise, Tanzania used to have higher than that. But this it has audited to remove the cumulative figures. And that's why Tanzania is around 10,000. But you can see others, 114,000 and so on, big numbers. If we add from the 20 countries in 2023, for all the countries we covered, we have 633,000 cooperatives in those countries, which is, to me, is big. The cooperative movement is here, and the same applies to membership. On membership, we had very few of 13.3 for those countries and their adult population, to an average of 32.8% in only those countries, which means that the presence of cooperatives in most countries in Africa is actually increasing. And so we can, just from this, we can say that the cooperative movement in Africa is alive, and it is growing, and it is present. And so we need to keep on connecting the dots that are emerging, and perhaps we should be having a higher representation among population than other regions of the world. I once served in it's called what? World Cooperative Monitor. I went there, but we wished to disagree on definition of what to include as a cooperative. For us in Africa, we are struggling with the actual definition. For them there, they're including cooperative-like businesses. I said, no, we said cooperatives, not business-like, right? But if you look at their percentages, their density is not 32%. It will be lower than that if you compare their population. And so we are on course. That's the message that comes out of this data. I think just to run through this, the qualitative changes, we have seen the quantities. But in qualitative changes, we are seeing the emergence of new types of cooperatives, the worker-owned cooperatives that are sprouting out. These are the cooperatives that are also introducing new business ventures. We are seeing cooperatives move away from agriculture and financial services. And they are now moving into other businesses like renewable energy, waste management, environmental conservation also. We have cooperatives in some countries. This is a very, very difficult area, but we still have new ones coming up there. They are in manufacturing, they are in health insurance, again, which no cooperative in Africa could dare venture into. We now have a few that are doing health insurance and microinsurance, building and construction, mining, transport, handicraft, even the creative arts, entertainment. We are seeing young people forming cooperatives around the performing at various functions as one of the vibrant participation of members than we used to see, of mismanagement, fraud, and so on. We still have pockets of those that we need to handle. We have weak institutional capacity, that's lack of professionals in managing those cooperatives, and what else? Lack of information, especially data. This I've been talking about. I don't know how we can make our presence. If we had more data, maybe what I'm talking about is just a small thing, but we don't have data. And so, in conclusion, I can say that cooperatives in the current era are present. They are growing, and they are improving at all fronts. And I can attribute this to a few of the factors that I highlighted there as a way of concluding this. And I'm asking you to add from some of the things that I have been saying. What is contributing to the new distribution, the new figures that we are seeing in cooperatives? But those are some of the factors that I'm seeing. There is a better understanding of cooperatives. There is ownership of cooperatives by members. There is cooperative education and training. There is bottom-up development of cooperatives rather than top-down, as it used to be. There is improving regulatory environment. There is a supporting economic environment. Where the businesses out here that are actually thriving. So add some more to that, and think by the end of the conference, we would have completed that list. I have taken long. Thank you very much for listening.
Some clarifications or some expansions that they would like to see? Yes. Okay, I see a hand here.